Now, the first thing we have to do is we're going to have to format an API URL. And you can't format an API URL unless you actually know what an API URL is talking about. So I'm going to save this, and I'm actually going to leave Cloud9 for a second and head back to the GIPHY developers console, the dashboard that we had before. Now, once you're back in the GIPHY developers dashboard, go ahead and click on create an app at the top, or right down here. I don't know where it's listed on yours. Just click create an app. And when you click create an app, you're going to enter your app name. We'll call this API practice. Bootcamp API practice. Upper line, or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. Bootcamp API practice. Briefly describe how you're going to use this API key. I'm going to find funny GIFs of pandas. Or whatever you want to look up. Dogs with hats, you know. Marguerite, the chicken, whatever. And what this is doing is giving you an API key. What an API key is, by the way, as soon as you click create a new app, an API key is like a unique identifier for your application so that GIPHY knows you're not trying to abuse their servers by making API call, API call, API call, API call. They know who you are. So if you start messing around and doing things that they don't want you to do, they can be like, yo, revoked. They revoke your privilege. It's like a bouncer at a bar who's like, I know you, throwing you out of the bar. Don't give that to students, by the way, because they don't know what bars are. But just as like a heads up, like that's kind of like, that's how I explain something of this type. Like a bouncer at a party, I think that's a better way to put it. Like if you have like your Sweet 16, that's a better way to talk to kids about this kind of stuff, because bars are no bueno, no bueno. And once you have this API key though, you don't need too much else except to understand how GIPHY gives you their data. Now, the cool thing about GIPHY is they make all of their GIFs publicly available for anyone who wants access to them. So all you have to do is head to their docs right here, and they'll tell you how to get their stuff. So I'm actually going to open this in a new tab and check this out. So that's also kind of a weird looking GIF. I just scroll down to make sure kids can't see that real quick. What this is this API, and there's like a ton of text here. Don't worry about any of the text. I literally just tell them, go down and click on that search button, because this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna search up GIFs, and GIPHY's API allows us to do that. Click on the search, it'll take you down. It's a thing called a search endpoint, and this is where things get a little technical when you start explaining APIs. An API, again, is a bunch of data that is made publicly available for use by any developer. And the way you get that data is by entering in a URL into your browser. Sometimes I like to show students, if you've ever been to reddit.com, does anyone know what Reddit is by any chance? Yeah, if you go to reddit.com, you can see Reddit has like all their front end, like they have this like layout or whatever. But if you go to the very end of reddit.com in the URL and you type in /.json, check this out. You'll get all of the data that makes up the front page of Reddit as soon as it loads. Right now I have a JSON formatter Chrome extension, which is taking up quite a bit of time, and more. You know what? Put this into it, by the way. This is what it'll look like for you if you pop it into an incognito window. I think that's actually a better way to look at it. Put an incognito window, type in reddit.com/JSON, wait for it to load. Once it does, boom! There is all of the data that the Reddit front page uses. This is actually JSON, stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's like a Ruby hash. It's taking a Ruby, it's giving you all of the data. I know it's unresponsive, kill it. It's giving you all their data in like a hash format so that you can go in and grab it if you know how to. But notice that all I needed to do was go to the URL and they sent me back the data. That is how we access data in APIs. You go to a certain URL, you format the URL correctly with the right options and parameters, and it gives you back the data you want. For Reddit, they allow anyone to get all of the data for their front page because they don't want to make mobile apps, I guess, for Reddit. So they allow other people to create mobile clients using all the data that Reddit gives out. And you can see here, like they have a URL for Reddit Media. They have all this information about the front page of Reddit that you can, like, St. Louis will drop minimum wage from 10 to 770. Oh boy, that's some interesting stuff. I could go check that out, but here's all the information about it. If I wanted to take this data from like a subreddit and build an app about it, it's super easy to do. So APIs, again, are a bunch of data that someone makes publicly available and you can access by hitting the correct URL in the way that their API expects you to. If you can do that, you can do all kinds of really cool things. So I'm gonna exit out of this because we don't need it for the time being. Or I'm just gonna, man, my computer is not having it right now. Hold on. Maybe? Nope. Okay, get out of my way. Gone. Now that all that is finally taken care of, this word right here, this is a term I'll usually write up on the board, an endpoint. An endpoint is the URL. So when we say search endpoint, it's referring to what URL we need to go to get the data we want. But it also tells you how to format that URL to get a specific subset of data. Because if they gave you all their data at once, it would be really hard to figure out how to get what you want. So instead, they have an endpoint for search, for trending, for translate, for random ones, by ID, stuff like that. And so here, the host is api.giphy.com. So if you want to get data from giphy.com, the first thing we're going to do back in our code really quickly is we're going to type in endpoint. I don't know why it's doing that. Endpoint, and we're going to assign that to a string http://api.giphy.com. Because that is the host endpoint. That's the core endpoint of their API. But that's the base. We don't want all of their info. We want a certain subset of their data. And back in the documentation, it'll actually tell you what you need to include after that URL to get the data you want. So if I go back to it, it says the path is version1/gifs/search. So back in my endpoint, I would say /v1 for version 1/search, or what is it again? /gifs/search, like that. Cool. And in fact, if you want to try this out, you could literally paste this into your browser and it might work. It actually won't work, but it would if you had an API key, which we happened to just get a second ago. So actually, I usually tell them to enter this in. I just tell my students, grab this link, copy it, paste it in to a new tab, and just see what happens. You get a response that says, no API key found in headers, request body, or query string. What that means is, like, if you don't give me an API key, I'm not giving you my data. It's like my mom at my Sweet 16 saying, no, your mean friends cannot come into the party. Absolutely not. Not until they're invited. So back in the documentation, it'll tell you right here the request parameters of what I need to include to make sure that this URL will work correctly. And it says the first parameter is called API_key. Now, the way you format this, whenever you request data from an API URL, is you're going to say, at the end of this whole thing, search, you would say, $API_key equals, and then we're going to put hashtag squiggly brackets, and we're going to say API_key. And I need a variable called API_key that is going to hold the actual string for my API key. And I'm going to get that from my dashboard, which is what we just got a second ago. So grab that. Here it is, API key. Take it and paste it in right there. Yes.
Small point. Is there
And I'm going to change this endpoint to double quotes so that my interpolation works, which I totally knew it did not need to be prompted to remember at all. And now, by the way, if you enter in a search term, which you also need, this will actually work. So if we come in here and we say my search term, which is a query, which is designated by Q, and you type in whatever you want, like cheeseburgers or funny cats or whatever, it will work. And every time you tack on another parameter to the initial parameter, which is the API key, or you can do it in the beginning, you have to include an and sign. So right here, I would say Q equals, and then we would put in the search term right here. And then right after that, we would include an and symbol. And just so you can see this, I'm gonna make sure we wrap the lines. This right here, this entire thing, it will work. The whole thing will work. If you just paste this into your browser and you fill in what search term and what API key should be, you'll be able to access all the data in the API. So go ahead and try that right now, and we'll come back in a second.